Mexico's most powerful drug kingpin was killed during a military operation.
El Mencho was killed after Mexico's Army Special Forces raided a home in the town of Talpalpa Sunday.
February 22nd, 2026. Mexican soldiers exchanged shots with El Mencho on a hillside in Jalisco. He's dead before noon. But just 24 hours later, 73 people have been buried alongside him, and none of it is a funeral. That's what one dead cartel boss costs. Not in money, in bodies, collected the same week. So here's what happens the day a cartel boss dies.
And this video you see playing out right here beside me, this is the chaos as everyone is running inside of the airport there in Guadalajara. Back here in the States, though, airlines are canceling flights to Mexico.
February 22nd, 2026, a Sunday morning in the mountains of Tapalpa, Jalisco. Mexican soldiers close in on a hillside property. Gunfire erupts. 4 men die on the spot. One of the wounded is Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, founder of the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, the most violent criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere, and a man the United States had a $15 million bounty on. He died on the way to Mexico City. Getting to that hillside took years. American intelligence supported the operation, something the White House confirmed publicly within days. British reporting later said the trail ran through his romantic partner, and that following her was what finally put soldiers on the right mountain. For a man who had survived helicopter shootdowns and a nationwide manhunt, it ended in a firefight that lasted minutes. For roughly 2 hours, it looked like the biggest law enforcement victory in Mexican history. Then the phone started ringing. CJ&G didn't mourn. CJ&G retaliated, and they did it in at least 20 states at once. Gunmen hijacked buses and set them across highways. They torched taxis, gas stations, pharmacies, and corner stores. They scattered tire spikes on federal roads and ambushed security forces from the shoulder. Mexico's security cabinet eventually admitted to the number nobody wanted to say out loud: 252 narco blockades in a single day. Around 90% of them were cleared inside 24 hours, which tells you how fast the army moved. It also tells you the cartel never intended to hold that ground. The blockades were a message, and the message was that CJ&G could shut down a fifth of the country whenever it wanted. Within the first days, at least 25 National Guard troops were killed. A car bomb killed a National Guard captain named Leonel Cardoso. A state police officer died. So did a security guard and a woman caught in the middle of it. Then it reached the tourists. Puerto Vallarta, one of the most visited beach cities in Mexico, went dark. Black smoke rolled over the resort strip. The airport shut down. American and Canadian airlines canceled flights, stranding thousands of vacationers in their hotels, while the U.S. Embassy issued shelter-in-place warnings for 5 separate states. And while all that was happening, armed men rammed a vehicle through the gate of the Puerto Vallarta area prison and pulled 23 inmates out. A guard was killed. Only 4 escapees were recaptured in the following days. Guadalajara, a city of 5 million people and a 2026 World Cup host site, simply stopped. The governor suspended public transport and told everyone to stay inside. Locals described it as a ghost town. 13 municipalities in neighboring Michoacan went the same way. And something new happened in 2026 that didn't happen in 2010. The panic went digital. News agencies later documented that a chunk of the terrifying footage spreading online that week was either recycled from older attacks or generated artificially. People were watching fake fires and locking their doors over them, while real ones burned 3 streets away. The government eventually confirmed the body through genetic testing. Almost a week later, they handed what was left of El Mencho over to his family. They buried him in a golden casket. 1 man died in the mountains that Sunday. A country burned for it by nightfall.
This amateur video, shot just over the border from Brownsville, Texas, captured a long gun battle between Mexican Marines and gunmen protecting one of Mexico's most wanted drug lords, Antonio Cardenas Guillen, better known as Tony Tormenta. Authorities say he was killed in the gun battle Friday, and so were 4 of his gunmen and 3 Marines.
Now imagine all of that pressure aimed at a single city. November 5th, 2010, 10 in the morning in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. If you stood on the American side of the river in Brownsville, Texas, you could hear it. 600 elite Mexican troops moved in on Antonio Ezequiel Cardenas Guillen. His nickname was Tony Tormenta. Tormenta means storm. He ran the Gulf Cartel alongside his imprisoned brother Ociel, and he did not intend to be taken alive. What followed wasn't a raid, it was a battle. Tony was not a subtle operator. He was a former customs official turned trafficker who liked being seen, and his personal security detail, the Escorpiones, were trained and equipped like light infantry. He had survived arrest attempts before. He had watched his brother Ociel get taken alive and extradited to a Texas courtroom, and he had made it very clear that was never going to be him. The fighting lasted somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. The military brought helicopter gunships and armored vehicles. The cartel brought grenades and belt-fed machine guns. And then the Gulf Cartel did something that would have become the standard playbook for every cartel that came after. They took the city hostage. Gunmen commandeered public buses and passenger vans and parked them sideways across every major avenue in Matamoros. They dragged a natural gas tanker into an intersection. They set vehicles on fire to choke the roads with smoke. Nobody could get in. Nobody could get out. Every international bridge connecting Matamoros to the United States closed. Schools locked their doors with the children still inside. Teachers moved students onto the floor, away from windows, and waited. Parents across town listened to gunfire and had no way to reach them. Tony Tormenta died that afternoon. So did 3 of his bodyguards, including an enforcer called El Tyson. So did 2 Mexican Marines. That's the official count, 6 dead. The unofficial count is very different. A law enforcement source told reporters at least 30 people were dead by noon. Local media reports put the day's total as high as 47. We will probably never know the real number, and there's a reason for that. Carlos Alberto Guajardo Ramirez was a 37-year-old crime reporter for the newspaper El Expreso. He drove toward the shooting to cover it, the way he had covered everything else in that city. He was killed during the operation, reportedly by military fire, after getting too close. The reporter who would have counted the dead became one of them. Control of the Gulf Cartel passed briefly to Tony's nephew Rafael, arrested within months. And the war with Los Zetas got worse.
The shootout between Mexican special forces and a small army of heavily armed drug gangsters ricocheted through the streets of Cuernavaca, Mexico for 4 hours. As troops moved in on a luxury condominium in this resort city just south of Mexico City, when the smoke cleared, one of Mexico's most wanted, powerful, ruthless drug lords, Arturo Beltran Leyva.
Some cartel bosses die quietly. This one died at the top of a luxury condo tower, and the revenge came for a family that had nothing to do with any of it. December 16, 2009, Cuernavaca, Morelos. 200 Mexican Marines surrounded the Altitude condominium complex, backed by 2 military helicopters and army armor. Inside was Arturo Beltran Leyva. His men called him El Barbas. The press called him the boss of bosses. He had once been Sinaloa cartel royalty before turning on his old partners, and by 2009 he had bought so many police commanders that the Mexican government had stopped trusting its own federal forces with the job. That's why they used the Navy. The firefight ran roughly 90 minutes. 6 of his gunmen died. 1 Marine died with them. His name was Melchizedek Angelo Cordova, and remember that name because this story is really about him. When the shooting stopped, photographs of the scene reached the press almost immediately. What they showed was so strange that it triggered a government investigation on its own. The capo's body had been laid out and covered in peso notes, dollar bills, and religious charms. Nobody has ever officially explained who arranged that. Mexico's Interior Secretary called the images unnecessarily offensive to the family and promised an inquiry. Message received either way. December 20th, They buried him in the family crypt at Jardines del Humaya in Culiacán, the cemetery where narco tombs are the size of houses. Soldiers ringed the ceremony. It was quiet, brief, and heavily watched. The next day, Mexico buried the Marine. Melquisedec Angulo Cordova got full military honors. Television cameras carried the funeral live. His mother stood at the front and accepted the folded flag from her son's coffin, on camera, with her surviving children beside her. That broadcast was the mistake. The following night, just before midnight, gunmen arrived at the Angulo family home in Paraíso, Tabasco. They smashed the front door open with a sledgehammer and opened fire on everyone inside. The Marine's mother was killed. So were two of his siblings and his aunt. Hours earlier, they had been at his memorial. Nothing like it had happened in Mexico's drug war before. Soldiers and Marines were targets. Their mothers were not. That same morning, gunmen killed the Sinaloa State Tourism Secretary and his driver in Culiacán. In Morelos, a banner threatening more reprisals was hung on a kindergarten fence and partially set on fire. A man named Gudiel Ivan Sanchez was later arrested for the attack on the family. One man arrested for the Angulo killings. One entire military branch that never sent a family to a public funeral the same way again.
No one expects the death of Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar to put much of a dent in the world cocaine trade. But as Diana Gonzalez reports, it does put an end to one of the bloodiest criminal careers in history.
An elite Colombian police unit killed Pablo Escobar in a shootout, cornering him here in this house where he had been hiding in the city of Medellin.
Every case on this list follows a template. This is where the template was written. December 2nd, 1993. Medellin, Colombia. One day after his 44th birthday, Pablo Escobar makes a phone call to his family that lasts a few seconds too long. The search block traces it to a middle-class house in the Los Olivos neighborhood. Escobar goes out a window and onto the terracotta rooftops. His bodyguard, a man everyone called El Limo, goes with him. Neither of them makes it off the roof. He had been running for 16 months by then, ever since walking out of the prison he had designed and built for himself. In that time, he had lost almost everything. A paramilitary group calling itself Los Pepes had spent the year hunting his lawyers, his accountants, his cousins, and his safe houses, burning his property and leaving bodies with notes attached. His empire had been reduced to a handful of bodyguards and a telephone. The world's most wanted man was hit in the leg, in the torso, and once behind the right ear. Colombian police celebrated on the tiles beside him. To this day, people argue about that last shot. His own family has always insisted he took it himself, rather than be captured. President Cesar Gaviria decorated the unit with the Medal of Valor. Washington called it a turning point in the war on drugs. Medellin had a different reaction. The next day, the funeral drew an estimated 25,000 people, not cartel members, ordinary residents. The man had bombed airliners and murdered presidential candidates, and he had also built housing, football pitches, and clinics in neighborhoods the Colombian state had written off entirely. For a lot of those people, he was the only government they had ever seen. The crowd at the mortuary pushed so hard against the building that the window shattered. At the cemetery in Itagüí, mourners surged for the silver metal coffin. They pried the lid open with their hands so they could touch his face. The priest gave up. The religious ceremony was canceled outright because the crowd could not be controlled, while chants of Viva Pablo went up around the grave. His wife and children never reached the coffin. They were pushed back by the crowd and left before their husband and father was in the ground. Here's the part that should have warned everyone about the next 30 years. Killing Escobar didn't end the cocaine trade. It redistributed it. The Medellin cartel fragmented. The Cali cartel absorbed the routes, and the paramilitaries who had hunted him kept their weapons. And in the barrios, a man who ran the most violent criminal enterprise on earth started getting prayed to like a saint. People still leave flowers on that grave in Itagüí. Tour buses stop there. 30 years later, Colombia exports more cocaine than it did the day he died. Hold on to that. It comes back.
The Mexican Navy claims to have killed the top Los Zetas drug cartel leader Heriberto Lazcano, along with 2 other gang members, in a shootout 80 miles from the Texan border in Mexico.
Photographs said to show the body of a notorious drugs gang leader are being shown on Mexican television. Heriberto Lazcano, the head of the Zetas cartel, is known as the executioner for his extreme violence.
Killing a cartel boss is hard. Keeping him is apparently harder. October 7, 2012, Progreso, Coahuila. A small town in northern Mexico hosting a Sunday baseball game. Navy Special Forces spotted 2 armed men near the field and moved on them. There was a short exchange of fire. Both men died. The Marines took photographs, secured the scene, and handed the unidentified bodies to state investigators, who fingerprinted them, performed autopsies, and sent them onto a funeral home in the town of Sabinas. Standard procedure for 2 anonymous gunmen, except one of them was Heriberto Lazcano, Zetnari, the executioner. A former Mexican Special Forces soldier who deserted, went to work for the Gulf Cartel as a bodyguard, and then built Los Zetas into the most feared paramilitary criminal organization the country had ever seen. There was a $5 million American bounty on his head. He was the highest-ranking capo killed in the entire Calderon offensive, and nobody at the scene realized who they had.
Now that the Navy has released these photos purportedly showing the body of Heriberto Lazcano, they're hoping that it confirms for many people that they indeed did kill him on Sunday in a gunfight between naval forces, Lazcano, and another criminal in his vehicle. There's been mounting skepticism in recent hours here in Mexico and confusion over just where the body of Heriberto Lazcano is. In fact, the Navy admitted to us earlier that they didn't have the body and had handed the body over to authorities in the state of Coahuila, where they say he was killed.
Think about the sequence for a second. Mexico's Marines killed the most wanted man in the country and then drove away without knowing it, because to them, he was just an armed guy near a baseball diamond who fired first. Los Zetas knew, and Los Zetas moved first. Around 1 in the morning on Monday, masked commandos pulled up to the Garcia funeral home in Sabinas. They forced their way inside, subdued the staff, and took both bodies. Then they made the funeral director drive them out in his own hearse. The theft wasn't even reported until 8 o'clock that night. By Tuesday, the state prosecutor had to stand in front of cameras and explain that Mexico had killed the leader of Los Zetas and had then misplaced him. The only thing that saved the government from total humiliation was paperwork. Investigators had already taken his fingerprints before the body vanished. The prints matched. Officially, Lazcano was dead. Unofficially, Mexico had no corpse, no funeral, and no proof anyone could hold in their hands. Conspiracy theories started that same week and never stopped. One analyst summed up the Zetas' logic bluntly. They take care of their dead. They never leave a comrade behind. That commando raid wasn't sentiment, though. It was strategy. A missing body means no photographs, no closure, and no clean transfer of power. Within months, Lazcano's second-in-command, Miguel Angel Trevino, known as Z40, had the organization, and the internal purge that followed made the Zetas even more violent than they had been under the man they stole out of a mortuary.
He was intercepted by Marines and the Army 13 kilometers from Tumbescatio, and when they asked him to surrender, he opened fire.
December 9th, 2010, Apatzingan, Michoacan. Federal police move on the leader of La Familia Michoacana, and the state comes apart. Nazario Moreno Gonzalez called himself El Mas Loco, the craziest one. He was a genuinely strange figure, even by cartel standards, a man who wrote his own book of moral teachings and required his gunmen to study it. No drugs, no alcohol, divine justice. La Familia executed people and left notes, explaining that God had approved it. He also had a business model that made the cult work. La Familia sold methamphetamine by the ton into the United States, while presenting itself to Michoacan as a protection force against outside gangs. Farmers paid them, local officials answered to them, whole towns treated them as the real authority. When police cornered him, his followers responded like a religion under attack. Around 7 in the evening, La Familia lit up 12 separate municipalities. Gunmen burned around 50 vehicles and blocked highways across Michoacan. Firefights ran through the night and into Thursday, roughly 24 hours of it, and Morelia, the state capital, effectively shut down. 11 people died, 5 of them police, 3 of them civilians who had no involvement of any kind, including a teenager and an infant. An estimated 400 gunmen carried their leader's body out of the police cordon and into the Sierra. 600 federal officers searched for it and found nothing. 3 days later, supporters marched through Apatzingán, demanding the government leave La Familia alone. The government declared him dead anyway. There was just one problem.
Many in Michoacan believed he was alive, and many of those who didn't prayed to him as a saint.
Nazario Moreno was alive. He had been alive the whole time. For more than 3 years, the most wanted man in Michoacan operated as an official ghost, rebuilding La Familia into a new organization called the Knights Templar, while his name sat in a government file marked deceased. And in the villages, something genuinely bizarre took root. People started building shrines to Saint Nazario. Statues of him in a Templar-style tunic appeared in home chapels and roadside altars. There was a written prayer asking Saint Nazario for protection and forgiveness of sins. Farmers swore they had seen a man in white moving through the mountains at night, performing baptisms. The state had killed him. His followers had canonized him. Both were wrong. March 9, 2014, Marines and soldiers found him near Tambiscatio and killed him for real. Fingerprints confirmed it this time. They buried him privately at a funeral home in Morelia. The altar stayed up.
A las 4 de la tarde de este domingo, la Agencia Internacional de Noticias AP informó que Thomas Constantin, director de la DEA, confirmaba la muerte de Amado Carrillo. Según la agencia AP, Constantin aseguró que fuentes confidenciales mantenidas por la DEA en México confirmaron la muerte de Amado Carrillo. Fue trasladado en un ataúd metálico y carroza de la funeraria al aeropuerto de la Ciudad de México.
Back to the drums. July 1997. Amado Carrillo Fuentes ran the Juarez Cartel and was, by Mexican government estimates, worth roughly $25 billion. Authorities later froze around $10 billion in accounts and seized more than 60 properties, and that was only what they could find. They called him the Lord of the Skies because he moved cocaine in a private fleet of jetliners. By 1997, the pressure was closing in, so he made a decision no kingpin had tried before. He would stop running by becoming someone else. He checked into a hospital in the Polanco district of Mexico City under a false name and went in for extensive facial surgery and liposuction. 8 hours on the table. July 4th, staff found him dead in his bed. The autopsy pointed to a sedative combined with anesthesia that stopped his breathing. The DEA publicly described it as a heart attack. Fingerprints and DNA confirmed the richest drug trafficker on earth had died trying to buy a new face. July 10th, his body came home to the village of Guamuchilito, Sinaloa, in a silver coffin. His mother met it. Mourners drove in from other states. They buried him at sunset the next day at the family compound. Then Juarez started killing itself. With Amado gone, every lieutenant who had ever been passed over made a move at once. Gunmen walked into the Max Fim restaurant in Ciudad Juarez in early August and opened fire on people eating dinner. Investigators recovered more than 100 shell casings from the floor. It was the opening statement of a succession war that his brother Vicente eventually won. And in November, 4 months after the surgery, agents opened those 3 drums on the Mexico City to Acapulco highway. The surgeons who had operated on him were inside. Mexico's federal anti-drug chief announced that the doctors had been responsible for the death of the drug lord and closed the file. The bodies had been tortured before they were sealed in. Whether they were guilty of anything at all is still argued about today. Plenty of investigators have pointed out how convenient it was for everyone to blame 2 doctors and close the case. It didn't matter. Somebody decided that when the Lord of the Skies didn't wake up, the men holding the scalpel would answer for it.
The battle in Mexico over an attempt to arrest the son of the notorious drug lord El Chapo, turning the streets into a war zone.
Violence paralyzed the streets of a Mexican city yesterday as security forces traded gunfire with heavily armed members of a drug cartel. The son of the notorious drug kingpin El Chapo was taken into custody, then let go.
Everything on this list so far shows what happens after a cartel boss dies. This last one shows what happens when the cartel decides he isn't going to. October 17, 2019. Culiacan, Sinaloa. A team of 35 Mexican soldiers and police enters a house in the Tres Rios neighborhood and detains Ovidio Guzman Lopez, son of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, and one of the leaders of the faction known as Los Chapitos. Textbook capture. No shots fired. They had roughly 45 minutes before the city stopped belonging to the government. An estimated 700 cartel gunmen flooded Culiacan. They came with 50 caliber rifles and grenade launchers mounted in truck beds. They set burning vehicles across the intersections. They hit a prison and pulled inmates out. Then they did the thing that actually ended the operation. Cartel commanders surrounded a residential complex on the city's edge that housed the families of soldiers. They announced they would fire grenade launchers into it and ignite the gas lines around it if Ovidio wasn't released. Wives, children, parents. All of them in military housing, all of them in the open. The president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, ordered Ovidio Guzman released. On camera, he said the decision was made to protect lives. At least 13 people were killed anyway. Security personnel, cartel gunmen, and civilians who had simply been outside. And at least 80 military families packed up and left the state of Sinaloa entirely. Mexicans call it the Culiacanazo. It's the day a criminal organization negotiated with a national government by holding a housing complex full of soldiers' children as leverage, and won in under 9 hours. The tactics were not improvised either. Everything Culiacan saw that day had been rehearsed somewhere else first. Burning barricades came from Matamoros in 2010. Mass prison breaks came from the Zetas playbook. Threatening the families of security forces came straight from what happened to the Angulo family in 2009. The cartels had been taking notes on their own dead bosses for a decade. They came back for him 3 years later. January 5th, 2023, roughly 3,500 troops moved on Culiacan a second time and took him for good. This time the cartel shot at a military helicopter and brought it down. 29 people died, 10 soldiers, 19 alleged cartel members. That's the price the second time, when the government decides not to blink. 8 men, 8 endings, and not one of them ended anything. Escobar got a saint's funeral, and the routes went to Cali. Lazcano's own men stole his body, and the man who replaced him was worse. El Chayo died twice, and got shrines built to him anyway. El Mencho got a golden casket and left 252 roadblocks behind him. The pattern never changes. The boss dies, the country burns, and somebody younger and hungrier picks up the phone. Governments call these operations deacons, like the organization is a body and the boss is the head. But a cartel isn't a body. It's a business with an opening at the top, and there are always applicants. Every man on this list was replaced, most of them within a week. So when you hear that a cartel leader has been killed, ask a different question. Not who got him. Ask who's next, and what it's going to cost the people who live there.